I have many testimonies, but I'll talk about, for me, kind of the life changing one, the one that marked my life, um, which was the story about me getting shot on February 26th, 1993. I'm walking home from the house of some friends and had nothing to do with Christ in my life at that point. I wasn't saved. I didn't know anything about God. And to be honest with you, I was at a house party, walking home, maybe about 2 blocks away from my home. I'm high as a kite. I was smoking weed. I was drinking. I was even on some medication for my back, some painkillers. So I'm as high can be. And I'm walking home, and a car pulled up on the side of me. And it was a local gang, which in that area, in the Black Hawk Park area in Fullerton and Laramie, it was the Pachuco gang. And they started representing to me. And as they were representing to me, I really couldn't grasp what was going on. Again, I'm not in my right mind. I'm high. It was a snowy day. Snow was probably about knee high. And as they started representing to me, the driver pulled out a gun. And when he pulled out the gun, I took off running. And as I took off running, he's following me, letting off shots as I'm running. This is all happening right in front of my sister's house, and they can't hear anything because they have the surround sound so loud that they could not hear what was going on. He had shot at me about 6 or 7 times when I'm approaching the alley. And as I was approaching the alley, I'm thinking, man, if I turn into this alley, he's gonna follow me, he's gonna hit me with the car. All of this is going through my mind in milliseconds, it's just running through your mind. And so I decided to turn around and go the opposite way of the way the car was, the way I was initially running. And because of the snow, because of the ice, I slipped and fell. And as I fell down, he jumped out of the car and he shot again. And when he shot, he hit me in my spine. He hit me right in my back and I fell to the ground. As I'm on the ground, he shoots probably another 3 times and I can hear the bullets going into the snow around my head. And then they jumped in the car and they took off. Now, I can't tell you how it went from me being on the floor to me standing up in the gate. I know one thing was this, that the moment that bullet hit my back, terror, and when I mean terror, I mean there's fear and then there's terror. And I've had fear many times in my life. I've never experienced terror outside of that night. And the only thing that came to my mind, the only word that came out of my mouth, I remember this god-awful, like a screech. It was almost animalistic. I could never duplicate it if I practiced. And it was like this screech that came out of me. And then immediately following that screech, I remember just screaming, "Jesus, help me!" And I went from being on the floor to standing up against the gate. Like immediately. There was no me getting up. It was from here to there. And as I'm making my way to the front door of my sister's house, I begin to pound on the door and I'm kicking at the door. And I hear this man start screaming from across the park, "Hey, hey!" So if I'm not already scared, if terror's not already, got me by the throat, I start kicking the door and pounding on the door with everything I have, and this guy's getting closer. He keeps screaming, "Hey, hey!" Once he got to the point where I could hear his footsteps, I covered my head and I closed my eyes because I'm thinking it's the guy that shot me. I'm thinking he's coming back, he's gonna finish off the job. And as he approaches me, I cover up my head, and as he hugs me from behind, he tells me, "Hey, I saw everything. Don't worry about it. I'm here." And when I look down, as he's hugging me and putting both of his arms around me, as I'm covering my head and I look down and it says La Santa Biblia, which in English means the Holy Bible. And in that moment, I kind of just felt like, all right, this guy's not against me, he's for me. And he said, I saw everything, I got you, I'm here. And at that moment, I kind of collapsed into his arms. My sister finally opened the door, my older sister. And she opened the door, and then all chaos broke loose. This guy carries me into the house, the guy with the Bible. And my brother-in-law and my cousin at the time, who eventually was murdered 3 years later from gun violence as well, they take off to go find the guy. And I'm laying there on my stomach, and my sister's panicking. She's calling 911, she's calling my parents. My father got to the house faster than the paramedics did, which was crazy. And he ran up the stairs, I'll never forget this, and he started kissing me in my mouth, something that my dad had never done. And I could only equate it to the fact that maybe he was trying to make up for all the times he didn't tell me he loved me. And he thought he was gonna lose me. He was trying to make up for it in that moment. That was just one of those little things that always stuck out to me. Like, I had never felt more love from him than I felt in that moment. My sister starts asking me what happened, and I start pointing at the guy. I can see him from where I'm laying down inside the house. And I told her, Janet, the guy that carried me in, the guy with the Bible, the guy with the little mustache, he saw everything. And she looked at me, with the most serious, most perplexed look on my face. And she looked at me and she said, Jay, you walked in by yourself. And I'm like, no, because I see him there. I see the dude there. And I'm like, no, him right there, the guy with the Bible, the guy that carried me in. And she's like, Jaime, you walked in by yourself. And so at the moment, I didn't know what to make of it. At the moment, I'm thinking, I'm just going crazy. I just got shot. I had no exit wound. So all of the blood is kind of filling up my stomach. I could feel my stomach getting really hot. At that point, the paramedics pick me up. It's like a movie. You see the movies, it's real. And so they load me up into the ambulance. They take off. And as loud as the ambulance siren was, the thing that was louder to me was my mother praying in the front seat. And my mom only speaks Spanish, so I could remember her saying, Señor, no me lleve a mi nene. Which means, Lord, don't take my baby. And I could just hear her. She's praying the whole time. And the paramedic, he's just real professional. He's doing his thing. And I remember kind of looking up at that light that was over me in the ambulance. And I remember asking the paramedic, I'm gonna die, right? I remember him just looking at me, and he wouldn't break routine. He was poking me, he was cutting my clothes off, he was putting needles, and I remember saying, hey, I'm gonna die, right? And he wouldn't even engage me. He wouldn't even acknowledge the fact that I was acknowledging that I was gonna die. I could feel my stomach again. It was getting harder to breathe. My lungs had collapsed. And I remember like the third or fourth time, me kind of saying, hey, I'm gonna die, right? And he looked at me with this look on his face, and I remember him like slamming his hand on top of my chest, and he screamed at me. I remember him even saying a bad word, and he said, nobody dies on my bus. Do you hear me? Nobody dies on my bus. And as he said that, I was like, okay, like I believed it, bro. Like, then nobody dies on the bus. And all that terror that was there, his words kind of took the edge off. I believed what he was saying. In the craziness of what he was saying, I believed what he was saying. And I preached a sermon on this just this past Sunday. And I remember telling the church, he could have told me, yeah, you're gonna die just like the dude that died this morning. Or he could have said, yeah, you're gonna die just like the other 5 guys that have died this week. But for some reason, he chose to speak life into me. And I believed it. I get to the hospital, and they take me into the emergency room, into the trauma room. And then it was, if it wasn't already chaos, it was chaos to the 10th power. I'm 17 years old. No 17-year-old should be dealing with this. They're asking me a bunch of questions. I remember the detectives and the cops being there trying to get as much information as they could out of me, because they don't know if I'm gonna make it or not. And they started drawing on my chest with like a marker, kind of marking where they were gonna open me up. And I remember the paramedic, or not the paramedic, but one of the nurses behind me, and he's talking to me, and I'm looking up, and he tells me, hey, he puts this mask over my face, and he says, count from 10 backwards. And I don't think I ever got to 8. I was like 10, 9, and then it was like, I was out. One of the crazy things, I won't use crazy, one of the divine things that happened in this whole thing is, I remember going under, and then I remember having like a bird's eye view of them operating on me. I could see there was this like piece of surgical paper that was separating my upper body from my lower body, and they had tape over my eyes, and the breathing tube was in my mouth, and I can see them kind of like doing surgery on me, and then I didn't wake up, I think, for like 3 or 4 days. I was in exploratory surgery for about 14 hours, and it was exploratory because I had no exit wound. They opened me up to see. They didn't know what was going on until they opened me up. When they opened me up, they found out that the bullet, I got shot with a low caliber bullet, 22, which just ricocheted. It went in, it blew up my kidney completely. I lost my right kidney. It blew up half of my liver. I lost half of my liver. It destroyed my diaphragm. It collapsed my lung. The bullet went into the right side of my body, does all of that, misses my heart, and lodges itself in my left shoulder. And so when I wake up 3 or 4 days later, I remember an aunt of mine being there, and I remember the tube in my mouth. The tendons and the muscles in my back had swelled up so much that I was temporarily paralyzed. The doctors didn't know if it was permanent or not. And they told my mom and my dad that even if I lived, I probably wasn't gonna walk because of where I got shot in my spine. But I remember being in the bed. I couldn't lay on my back because I am shot in my back. I couldn't lay on my front because I got surgery in my front. And I couldn't lay on my right side because I had all these tubes. So I'm laying on my left side. And I remember, for those that know me, they call me the Carmex King. Because since a little boy, since I was in the 5th grade, I always have Carmex. I have some in my pocket right now. And my lips get dry, and so I always put Carmex. And I remember the nurse coming, and this nurse, she was putting Carmex on my lips. My mom brought it, and she was giving me ice chips. And I'll never forget the smell of roses. It was like a Filipino nurse, and she smelled like roses. But when I tell you she smelled like roses, it wasn't like a light perfume. It was like permeating the room, like the room smelled like roses. And she took such great care of me all night long. She kept giving me ice chips, and they had these little sponges that they would soak in water, and she's putting Carmex on my lips. And that same night, they pulled the breathing tube out of my mouth. I remember that. And then the morning nurse came, and she said, the tube is out of your mouth. You're probably gonna have difficulty speaking, but try to speak. And I was speaking fairly quickly, and she said, how do you feel? And I said, I'm good. The nurse last night took very good care of me. And she looked at me so confused, and she said, I'm the nurse that's been on all night. There was no other nurse. And I told her, no, the nurse that kept putting Carmex on my lips, the nurse that kept giving me ice, the one that smelled like roses, I told her. And she's like, I'm the nurse all night. I'm checking on you because my shift is over. And I couldn't grasp that. It wasn't until years later, listen to this, that I get saved, and I'm at Clemente High School, and Pastor Choco's preaching, and he's screaming out the names of God. And he's saying, he's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He's the strong tower. He's the lily of the valley. And then I remember him saying, he's the roses of Sharon. And the moment he said the roses of Sharon, that smell that was in that ICU unit, it hit me. And it was for the first time that I realized that the roses that I smelled, it wasn't a nurse. It was Jesus. It was the roses of Sharon. And for me, it just confirmed. I remember just breaking and crying out in front of my wife there. I remember just crying out because it clicked for me that the roses I had been smelling all night was the roses of Sharon. It was God. And it was consistent with the guy with the Bible, right? Like La Santa Biblia, that my sister said you walked in by yourself. It was consistent with the words of the guy in the ambulance that said, "Nobody dies on my bus." And then afterwards, I remember my family talking to me and telling me the chaos as I started kind of coming out of this. I remember the chaos, or my family telling me the chaos in the emergency room that night. And that as the doctor came in to tell my parents that they had lost my right kidney. And so the doctor comes in, and as he's talking to my dad, my mom doesn't speak a lot of English. So as he's kind of just nodding his head, like we lost his right kidney, my mom only equates that to we lost him. And my sisters tell me that my mom passes out. And I have an aunt, she's still alive, a Pentecostal aunt. And I always say, if you don't have a Pentecostal aunt, get you one. And when I mean Pentecostal, at that time, I mean blue jean skirt all the way down to the ankles with the little moñito and the aunt that won't go anywhere unless she has a Bible in her hand, that kind of aunt. And she was here from Puerto Rico. And she didn't speak a lick of English. But all she sees is the doctor going like this to my parents. And my family tells me that my aunt popped up in that room. And as the doctor was saying what she thought he was saying, that they had lost me, and she said, no. In Spanish, she said, no puede morir, he can't die. Porque él tiene que predicar el evangelio. He needs to preach the word. Y él le va a adorar a las naciones, and he's going to worship over the nations. And so that night was a series of words that were spoken to me from the guy that carried me, from the paramedic, from the nurse, to my aunt, that all spoke words into my life. And I've said this, I'm not here because I got ordained now being a pastor all these years later, I'm not here because I got ordained. I'm not here because my mother gave birth to me. I'm not here because my wife, Camille, introduced me to the love of my life, Jesus. She's the one that took me to church. I'm here because people in the darkest moments of my life spoke a word into me. And it was a word of life. And so now as a pastor, I understand the power of words. And so I've preached this, and it's a sermon that's dear to me, that the words have the power to manifest. And so this testimony, my prayer is that it frees individuals. My testimony is that if your relationship is falling apart, if you're having struggles in your marriage, not that my testimony is bigger or better than yours or more anointed, but if God could deliver me from the brink of death, man, he could restore your marriage. If God pulled me from the grasp of hell, then man, he can restore your son that's on drugs, or he can deliver your daughter that doesn't serve the Lord. If he did it for me, right, as we say in church, then he can do it for you. And so my biggest thing is that if you have a testimony, stop sitting on it. Stop being afraid to share it with people, because the more you sit on that testimony, the more you're sitting on somebody else's breakthrough. Somebody's gonna hear this message, someone that has gotten shot, someone that's been through what I've been through. And I believe, right, I'm speaking this prophetically, that someone's gonna hear this and something's gonna click in their spirit, and they're gonna say, it's my turn to share my story. And so I'll tell you this, I don't know about your testimony or this person's, but I own this testimony. This testimony belongs to me. And so I own it. And so my prayer is that people just begin to stop dealing with the shame of their testimony, because testimonies sometimes are bad. It's the version of you that you wish nobody would find out about. But if people would stop being fearful and get over the shame that some of our testimonies ain't pretty, that's fine. The glory that comes out of your story, that's the pretty part. That's the glorious part. And so I'll say this, and this might baffle people's minds, but getting shot, being left for dead, losing my kidney and half of my liver, and having to learn to walk again, all that stuff that I went through because of the night I got shot. I know this might mess up your mind, but it's the best thing that ever happened to me, because that became the pulpit that I would pastor, that I would preach from. And so if I ever don't have a sermon, I always have a story. So God became real to me through this. And so that can never be denied to me. Because it wasn't a sermon, it wasn't a song, it wasn't a book, it wasn't a YouTube video. It was God showing up in flesh through that man that carried me. That man didn't carry me, God carried me. It was God speaking through that paramedic. That paramedic didn't speak to me. It was God telling me, Jay, you're not gonna die because I'm not done with you yet. Your purpose hasn't been fulfilled. People, all they saw that night was a 17-year-old shot kid. But God was like, I got a pastor in this van. I got a pastor in this ambulance. There's a pastor on that operating table. I have a father. I have a husband. I have a mentor. I have a mentee. I have a son. And God saw what other people couldn't see. And so, yeah, man, I'm grateful for my story. I wouldn't change it for nothing in the world. And so God gets the glory at the end of the day. It's not pretty, but that's all right, because it's my story. And so testimonies have the power to deliver, and I pray that you're delivered through this testimony.
He comes up from behind me, and as I cover my head, because I think it's the guy that shot me, comes back to push me on. Up there in the light. And I'm thinking, this is how it ends for me. Terror in my heart. And él no se puede morir porque él tiene que predicar el evangelio de Cristo y él le va a hablar a las naciones. God has spoken to me. When I most needed my aunt, the guy in the ambulance, and a Redwood, they didn't give me a penny. You know what they gave me? They gave me a word.